Hey, howdy and hello, everybody. Welcome back into T1A Tier 1 Ascension. So this segment's going to be called Two Sides of the Coin. We're going to look at the good, the bad. We're going to kind of determine where their value is and what that expectation is. So you know whether or not you are going to take a calculated risk on whether or not they're going to be good for your fantasy team. Let's get into it. All right. So, like I said, this is two sides of the coin, and what it's about is taking players, analyzing some good, some bad, kind of seeing where their value is sitting and the expectation for the season, whether or not that's going to be good for your team or not. The first player that I have up in this segment is going to be Alvin Kamara. Right now, currently sitting at 6th round in one QB drafts and almost the 9th round for two QB startup drafts. 2 rounds, usually about two quarterbacks, about what's going on for there. But the big looming question here is whether or not he's going to be suspended, which we all figure he was going to be. And with the news yesterday, that's very likely. Of course, it's a violent offense. The NFL is trying to show that they want to be on top of all that stuff. But what is the expectation for how long he will be out? Going to be 1 to 2 games. At the very most, it's going to be 4 games. With the history of the violent suspensions that have been out there, it's not that long. So we go back to 2008. We had Pac-Man Jones fight with a bodyguard. He got 4 weeks. So back in 2015, Anna McPauley, he got into a fight with Geno Smith in the locker room, ended up breaking Geno Smith's jaw. He got 4 weeks. Jameis, he had his sexual assault scandal. He got 3 weeks in 2018. Cedric Benson, he had a misdemeanor assault. He got 3 weeks. So with Kamara not being directly involved and the way the legal system rolled out, I see 1 to 2 weeks. Here at some of the notable suspensions for anything. A lot of it where you're looking at misdemeanor assaults, you're getting 3, and some of the other violent things 2. So I'm thinking he gets probably 2 game suspension based on everything that's gone on around it. It was mostly his crew, and it wasn't really him, and he was kind of involved, but not. So very likely they just say 2 weeks and then move forward. So let's look at how that affects where he's going to play and when. So looking at their schedule, if he misses the first 2 weeks, he's out the Titans, he's out against the Panthers. Probably good for him. They're somewhat decent defenses. So he gets to come back versus Green Bay, Tampa, New England, the Texans. So looking at that going forward, it should be an open road for him to see really whatever his workload used to be. And we'll cover that here in a minute. Going against a lot of those teams, you're looking at fair to mediocre defenses, and that's really it. Expectations. What should we expect from Kamara? Well, RB2 numbers. Maybe he'll have a touchdown that week and push him into like RB1, so top 12 in that week. But I really see most of his production sitting him in between, that 12 to 24 running back each week, just because his production is going to be good. We don't expect him to see some touchdowns. But let's look more into what's an RB2 and the numbers around that. So an RB2 is their weekly average is usually anywhere from 11 to 14 points a week. So we're looking right now at like 30 yards rushing, 35 yards receiving, and 4 receptions. That's going to get you 10.5 points. I see him having a little bit more than that, but if you expect a baseline of 10.5 from him each week, you're going to be just fine. He's going to be a flex. He's going to be your RB2 or RB3 on your squad, and you're going to be okay. Where I am worried, though, Kamara only scored in 2 games last year. He had 1 rushing touchdown in Week 16, and the other game he had 1 rushing touchdown and 2 receiving touchdowns, and that was in Week 8. And that's really kind of what we're hoping for with Kamara. You're not going to have him doing 7, 8 receptions and 70 yards and having 40, 50 yards rushing. That is just not where his role is going to be. And that's not what we should expect from him. He's not prime Alvin Kamara anymore. You got to look at him more as a veteran running back who's still in a prime receiving age. So if he's a receiver, these are the years that we're looking at that are good, but we've already seen that little drop in production. All right, so what I have pulled up here is the top chart is Jamal Williams stats, and the bottom is Alvin Kamara. So from 2017 on, Jamal Williams, this last year was his complete outlier season, having 1,000 yards rushing, 17 touchdowns, which was phenomenal. And then you look over at his receptions, 12. Just wasn't utilized in that role. That was DeAndre Swift's role. So they used him as a goal line back. They started using him more as the mainline rusher, but he still only averaged 62.7 yards per game. That's not anything exceptional. It was really touchdowns that made Jamal Williams that viable running back. And then we look down here at Alvin Kamara's stats. So he had a season with 14 rushing touchdowns and 16 rushing touchdowns, averaging 58 and 62 yards per game. Sounds kind of familiar. And then you look at his receiving work on those years, and that's where he got 81 receptions, 83 receptions. Those stats are phenomenal for a running back. So he's doing some good, mediocre work in the rushing game and then just had some amazing receiving volume. What happened last year? Well, the first 4 games of the season, he was dealing with a rib issue. The first game he played was all right. Then he took a game off. Third game came back. He was okay. And then took another game off. So that really affected the start of it and the per game numbers of how everything flowed for him. So in essence, he almost missed the first 4 weeks. So in the first 4 games, he had 7.6 fantasy points and 7.3. He only played 62% of snaps and 70% of snaps, which is kind of on par with where he was last year. But he had 3 receptions for 7 yards and 39 yards rushing the first game, 61 yards rushing, and 2 receptions for 12 yards the second, or week 3. So it was hard to see any usage. And then he comes out in week 5 and has 24.4 fantasy points, 6 receptions for 91 yards, 103 yards rushing. So he still has that capability. You just looking over his total season, he was much more limited in what he was doing for production. And then he had some good games, some okay games. So middle of the season he was doing good, but you also have to look at the rest of his backfield. Kamara has done best when he's been paired with somebody to take some workload off of him, whether they're being able to rush or just be able to be on the field to give him breaks. He is very efficient with what he does on the football field, and having somebody like Mark Ingram on there where he can be in there to pass, he doesn't have to. He can be in there for goal line rushes, but he doesn't have to. It just giving Kamara that break that he might need because he had a big 40-yard play, needs to sit out. If you don't have those backup players that are worthwhile to come in or to work third downs or just give somebody a change of pace, then it's going to be hard for the star running back that is working on efficiency and limited touches to really shine. And kind of why I worry a little bit about Pollard this year too. But last year's competition in the backfield was Tony Jones, Benjamin, Mark Ingram was there for a little bit, Latavius Murray, David Johnson. There wasn't much there. So the Saints add Jamal Williams this offseason and Kendre Miller. We have seen Jamal Williams, as these stats show here, be efficient in the running game and be effective in the receiving game and still be able to produce RB2 numbers on a year. Kendre Miller, great young prospect. They don't spend a whole lot of draft capital on him, and he didn't get really utilized in the receiving game. if we're looking at receiving work and rushing work, receiving work is likely going to be Kamara in this backfield. He's still going to be a part of this offense. It's still the same coaching staff that have been there for a while. They know who he is and what he's capable of. His involvement is still going to be utilized as what I would see as like a lower end or second, third option in the receiving game, and still going to be involved in the rushing game. So that's how I'm still seeing that he's going to be an RB2 in his production each week, and really think, this Saints backfield's going to be okay in the NFL, and it's going to kind of suck for fantasy in the sense that we're not going to see those huge RB1 numbers week in and week out for Kamara, expecting the 80 plus receptions a year. That's just probably not in the cards for him anymore. He is definitely in the twilight of his career. It's not over. He's not done. He's not washed, but we're still seeing that he's going to be getting less and less touches. His explosiveness is not nearly what it used to be, and that's expected. So, where is his dynasty value at? At the highest, you are looking at like a late first round pick for 2024, or you're looking at two decent, like mid or better second round picks. That's kind of where you're at with him. That if you're shopping him, if you're looking to buy him, I wouldn't pay anything more than that. Early in the offseason, I traded him for an early second, was very happy about it, and moved on. An early round second probably felt like a steal for that other manager. So how much longer does he have? Do they really switch Kamara into a role, kind of like they did with LT, where he's just like this gadget receiving back and just has explosions when he has explosions? Possibly. Does New Orleans run Kamara as more of a gadget type player? I think so. I mean, it's going to be very likely they have two other capable backs that can take a lot of that rushing workload, some of that goal line work. You know, Jamal Williams can do some receiving. The Saints have a new quarterback who's not been very known to pass to running backs. I mean, Jacobs got what, 40, 45 receptions with Carr. That could also be offensive scheme, but we don't know because he hasn't played anywhere else and he's had a ton of different coaches. So it could be just offensive scheme. Now, when Carr has had a great short area receiver, whether it be Renfro, Waller, we've seen those players shine because he hits them often. We know Carr is not super mobile, so he is going to be looking for dump offs. He is a veteran quarterback. He doesn't want to take those shots. He gets the ball out of his hand. So if Kamara's on the field, I would still look for Kamara to get the ball. With all of that, I think we still have a safe 2-year window for Kamara. He likely hits solidly RB2 this year. Probably see some of that role diminished the next year. It really becomes a three-headed running back committee next season, and maybe even by the end of this season. How I ultimately see everything rolling out for this backfield is Kendrick kind of becomes a little bit more of your grinder back between the 40s, first, second down. Jamal and Kamara will lead all of the important touches, red zone, goal line, third down, receiving. So I think if you already have Kamara on your roster, you're not looking to really move him unless it's like some first round value, or you're getting a younger running back like Javante or ETN, and it's likely that he's on your roster because you plan to be somewhat competitive. If you're not going to be competitive and you're not relying on him to be your first running back on your roster, your top scorer, I think you're going to be okay. But if you're relying on him other than to be your running back two for your squad, I think you're going to be very disappointed. With all of that said, some of the stats, the suspension, kind of his competition in the backfield, Alvin Kamara ends up being a solid RB2, and he from like 16 to 20 in the rankings, and he's going to produce very likely 12 points per game, very similar to what he had last year, but take away some of those crappy games at the start of the season because he was injured and replace that with a couple games of being suspended where he's just not producing and he's still healthy, which is always a great thing for a vet running back coming into the season. They usually get it banged up a little bit in training camp and have a little tweak of this, a little injury of that during the preseason, but he's going to get a week or two off, be completely healthy, and I would definitely look for that big explosion game. That is usually Kamara when he comes back from being, off or injured. So I hope that information was helpful for you and that you have a better understanding of where Alvin Kamara's values are sitting and what you can expect from him for your roster. Next up for the two sides of the coin is going to be DJ Moore. But till then, hope you all have a great one. Latest.